So following the unpopularity of Donald Trump, Republicans are facing a blue wave come November. In fact, in recent polls, Democrats hold a plus 14 advantage over Republicans in midterms. So that's a pretty big deal, which means they could possibly retake the House. But hey, don't worry, Republicans. Nancy Pelosi just promised that if that happens, she's not going to do anything progressive. David Dayen of The Intercept is reporting that Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi has made the public a big promise in her new legislative agenda if the Democrats decide to win. One of those big things is that she is promising to resurrect something called the pay-go rule. Now, what's the pay-go rule? Well, basically, it means that spending is mandated, right? If you do any spending, it must be offset with either budget cuts or tax increases. Basically, everything has to be paid for. Fascinating. Now, most people think, oh, well, that makes sense. I mean, you can't do anything like that in your household. But remember, government doesn't run like a household. So, and look, while there are programs that require initial investment, I mean, there are programs that require initial investment up front when it comes to funding, and then provide savings down the line. Under this rule, Democrats would either have to make cuts somewhere else or raise taxes, something that's actually very, very difficult to sell. So that's your big problem. Republicans will come back and say things like, oh, well, that's it. Democrats, they want to raise your taxes. They want to raise your taxes to pay for these entitlement programs and all this socialism and welfare. They can't. Well, we're $20 trillion in debt. Can't afford it, can't afford it, can't afford it. And if you pound that message enough, it's possible it will work. But it will definitely work with Democratic politicians who now get the message of, oh, no, we can't afford it. We got to do this pay-go rule, right? Now, Dan explains that forcing budget offsets for every piece of legislation would make it more difficult to pass a host of liberal agenda items, from Medicare for all to tuition-free college. Now, both of those things have been shown to save money. Nonetheless, there is upfront cost in setting those systems up. So when you try to set up a Medicare for all system, you're going to need funding. Well, if we're under a pay-go rule, guess what? It's going to be much more difficult to secure that funding because it has to be immediately offset by, once again, budget cuts or tax increases. At least, as I said before, under this rule. Now, it continues. As Dan writes, a trend of Democrats caring far more about deficits than Republicans, constraining the activist impulses of liberal policymakers while giving conservatives free rein to blow giant holes in the tax code. And that giant hole, one of them would be the Trump tax cuts. That's only the first round of Trump tax cuts. He actually wants to do more. A second round. Oh boy. Now, according to Axios, Pelosi is committed to reviving pay-go, which she instituted as a standing rule upon taking over the House in 2007. That's to show how conservative Nancy Pelosi actually is. Though she waived the rule to pass the economic stimulus bill responding to the Great Recession, most of the other major legislative initiatives of the early Obama era, including the ACA, were paid for. Now, do Republicans talk about that at all when they attack the ACA? No, of course not. You don't even hear Democrats talking about this. No, they don't mention that it's paid for at all. And Republicans still say, oh, it's so unaffordable. We can't afford to keep this program. We got to get rid of it. No matter what, Republicans are going to win under the pay-go rule. So, now in 2010, Obama took this rule further by signing the statutory Pay-As-You-Go Act, which enables presidents to enforce across-the-board cuts if Congress violates the rule. So basically, what Dan is pointing out is that this entire rule is meant to handicap progressive initiatives while empowering Republicans and of course, meeting them at their own arguments. You're meeting them on their terms, the terms that they set. Now, speaking of Republicans, when they took over the House, they changed PAYGO. Well, what did they change it to? They changed it to CutGo. They applied offsets to spending, only to spending instead of tax cuts, mandating that spending must be offset with budget cuts instead of tax increases. You know what happens when you do that? You tear a giant hole in the budget. And of course, that's what the point is. Now, Dayen notes that the move was a formalization of the trend. Deficit fears stop Democrats from moving forward on social programs, while Republicans plow ahead with tax cuts whenever they get into power. So, and of course, that is disastrous. But that's what's been happening for quite some time. I think this actually really started happening in the Clinton era. Now, Pelosi's planned legislative package for the beginning of the potential House takeover would also include, though, establishing ethics and lobbying reforms, okay, lowering the cost of health insurance premiums and prescription drugs. There is one surefire way to do that. It's Medicare for all, which, of course, Pelosi is absolutely against, and spending $1 trillion for infrastructure investment. Those would cost money, and under PAYGO, all of that would have to be offset. And because, again, they're not going to be able to pass through tax increases very easily, or possibly at all. What would they cut? Well, I remember Obama putting Social Security on the table. So there's that. Now, look, here's the thing. Dayen does note that liberals have plenty of ideas of how to raise revenue, but it puts them in a box, politically, having to propose tax increases that Republicans gleefully broadcast. Meanwhile, Republicans unconcerned with deficits get to play Santa Claus without having to match tax cuts with anything unappealing. And that is how the game is played. See, conservatives, which of course have always been backed by by big money, during the FDR era, for example, they kept getting their asses handed to them. They got creamed every election. Why is that? It's because we had strong progressives that were actually strong on policy. Turns out people like progressive policy. They like Social Security. They love Medicare. And so when you push forward those kinds of programs that actually help regular human beings and not corporations and not members of the super rich elite that already have all the money in the world, you win. You win. Republicans, conservatives, I should say, were getting destroyed election after election. And so they decided, wait a minute, if Democrats can be Santa Claus, why can't we? Except we're going to be the Santa to rich white people. Keep it real. And so what they did is they said tax cuts for everyone. And they forced Democrats into the position of continuously balancing the budget, which means, of course, austerity. So it's been like that ever since they had that idea. Democrats balance the budget, Republicans destroy it. And then, of course, they turn government surpluses into deficits when they're into power. And when they're not in power, by the way, when they're not in power, they howl and scream about the deficit and debt. And then, of course, Democrats decide, oh my God, I have to listen to Republicans when they talk about debt and deficits. Oh, fine. Oh, here's austerity. And when they do austerity, they can't do progressive programs like Medicare for all. And so that actually causes people to feel financial pain, which makes them think, well, if I vote for Democrats, all they're going to do is do austerity measures on us. Where Republicans, they're going to give us tax cuts. We're going to keep more of our money. That's how the game is played. That's how the game is played, man. This is a no-win scenario for progressives. And now the current crop of Democrats that are financed by corporations is in on the game. They buy this narrative hook, line, and sinker. Though there are some Democrats that are fighting back. Here you have Senator Brian Schatz. Now he said, quote, on the pay-go rule, quote, I don't play the pay-for game. I just reject the idea that only progressive ideas have to be paid for. We can work on that as we go through the process, but I think it's a trap. And here, I really wish I had a clip of Admiral Akbar. Because it's true. It's true. It's a trap. It's a Republican trap. Now, not only that, but you have Rahul Grijalva. Now, he's progressive. Back in June, he told The Hill, the pay-go thing is an absurd idea now, given the times and given what's already been done to curry favor with corporate America. He also argued that it was irresponsible to try to tie up Congress's ability to respond to economic downturns or, in the current discussion, to slash programs, which I absolutely agree with. And of course, the entire discussion that we're having right now completely ignores MMT. That is modern monetary theory. So here you have a former Sanders staffer, Stephanie Kelton, who's been out there, who's been talking about the idea of modern monetary theory. Now, she said that public spending is only constrained when the economy is running at full capacity and inflation starts to rise. Now, is that the case today? No, we actually have incredibly low levels of inflation. Public deficits, she points out, are just another way of talking about private surpluses. She has warned of the dangers of balanced budgets that take money from the hands of ordinary people. Now, Kelton has been involved in strategy sessions with Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer and remains close to Senator Sanders, who would chair the Budget Committee if Democrats take the Senate. But Pelosi has been unmoved. Now, let's go back for a second. You imagine Senator Bernie Sanders in charge of the Budget Committee. Awesome. Now, look, I'm pretty sure Schumer also remains unconvinced because Schumer loves the big money, the big corporate money. And so he's like, no, we got to give tax cuts to corporations, and we can't spend too much. We've got to be conservative on our spending. Ridiculous, right? Now, in a statement, Kelton said that pay-go is a self-imposed, economically illiterate approach to budgeting. Republicans know this, which is why they have unabashedly used their power to expand deficits and hence deliver windfall gains for big corporations and the already well-to-do. And she has a solution to this. She said, instead of vowing budget chastity, Democrats should be articulating an agenda that excites voters so that they can unleash the full power of the public purse on their behalf. I love that. That's absolutely what we should do. But the Democrats right now, led by Nancy Pelosi, in the House at least, and Chuck Schumer in the Senate, they'd rather play in the hands of Republicans, just like they always do, because they're paid to lose. If Pelosi wins re-election in her primary, then look, any blue wave, it doesn't matter how big it is never going to lead to progressive policy. We have got to get rid of Nancy Pelosi. Now, she is up for re-election. She is facing a primary, Kevin De Leon. And Kevin De Leon is far more progressive than Nancy Pelosi. Perhaps not as progressive as we would like, and there are certainly some arguments against De Leon, but you can't argue that he's worse than Pelosi. He's miles better than Pelosi. So any of you watching in California, get involved, man. Go out and vote. Primaries. They matter. Nancy Pelosi cannot continue. If we have a blue wave, she cannot be Speaker of the House. If that happens, then say goodbye to Medicare for all. It ain't never going to happen. As long as she's in charge, any progressive priority, never going to happen if she's in charge. Go out and vote. Very, very important. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.